And welcome to the first executive meeting of the new council, and I'm glad that we're able to meet in a hybrid fashion. We have a number of members in the room and a number of members and officers online. Do we have any apologies?
No, Convener, there are no apologies.
Okay, thank you. I understand that Councillor Bowes is just running a wee bit late, so I will join us whenever he can. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest at this time in any item on the agenda? Oh, no. Okay, thank you. We move to the minute of the meeting held on the 15th of March. There may only be a few of us actually at that meeting, but it is there as a record. So if those that were there, are they happy to agree the minute? Thank you for that. Moving on to item 4, which is the rolling action log, and I'll turn to Mr. Moody for an update.
Yes, thank you, Convener. This item is on the agenda for noting only, but it provides members of the executive with a record of decisions made previously by the executive where further reports are required and expected. Where the report is not available, there's an update on the reasons for that in the comments column, and this is also an opportunity for members of the executive to ask any questions on any of those items. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Are there any questions in relation to the rolling action law? No. Are we content to agree?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving into our reports now, and the first one is the predicted financial position 21-22, and we have Amanda Templeman, who is going to... Oh, beg your pardon, you're absolutely right, sorry, I was just a wee bit too quick to move on there. Amanda, you can stand down for a minute or two. Referral from the Audit Committee on the Corporate Risk Management update. Amanda.
Thank you. So the report in front of you today was considered by the Audit Committee on the 21st of March, and the committee agreed to refer the report to the Executive for consideration and approval. So obviously the report is a little bit out of date. It was considered by the Audit Committee 3 months ago. 1 or 2 updates I'll provide during my presentation. And also just to note that we're aware that the risk training hasn't happened yet. It will be arranged for members and we will come back to you with details on that. Just for a little bit of background, the Council has a risk management policy that was updated in September 2021, and that sets out the roles and responsibilities for those involved in risk management. And within the policy, the Audit Committee have responsibility to review and seek assurance on the framework of risk management, governance and control, and the Executive are responsible for scrutinising updates, approving the Corporate Risk Register, challenging officers on risks and governance, and horizon scanning for new and emerging risks. And that's the reason that this report is in front of you today. So a summary of the Corporate Risk Register is included Appendix 1 of the report, and that sets out the risks to the Council's current business plan, which are rated high, and a second table which shows a summary of the risks to delivering service and operational plans, which are rated medium. And the appendix highlights changes since the previous report in each of the risks shown, and paragraphs 5.2 to 5.4 provide some narrative for those movements. And there's just a few to note in the corporate risks, which I'll highlight. One is the counter-terrorism risk, which has increased from medium to high. And in part, that's the reflection of the potential legislation, which may have significant resource and practical implications for the Council. There is a corporate risk relating to leadership, decision making and governance. And as you may expect, given the best value audit report, that risk has been changed from medium to high. But with the work that the council's undertaking, we'd hope that that risk would reduce back down to medium fairly soon. And the third risk relates to community planning and empowerment. Prior to the Audit Committee report, the risk was revised from medium to high, and again that was flowing from the Best Value Audit report, which identified the need for improvements in community planning partnership and the need for locality plans. But I think it is worth noting that there's been good progress in that area since, with the production of the Falkirk plan and 2 of the 3 locality plans produced. So, the first annual report on the Falkirk plan is expected in autumn of this year. So since the Audit Committee report, which as I say was 3 months ago, that risk has now been reassessed as medium. Appendix 2 of the report summarises the corporate risk dashboards, and those dashboards aim to provide assurance on services progress in embedding risk management policy, as well as highlighting some key operational risks in Table 2. Table 1 shows an amber rated position for performance, and again, given the outcomes from the Best Value Audit report, that may be expected, but the actions being undertaken as part of the Best Value Action Plan should address that. And similarly, Table 2 shows some key operational risks around equalities, and that again links to the Best Value Audit report and action plan. There are key operational risks for health and safety, resilience and business continuity, sustainability and climate change. And these ratings that are in that appendix, they don't reflect a change in those areas, but work is continuing with services to address each of those areas. But as Appendix 2 highlights, some areas such as climate change, for example, will require substantial capital funding to address, and that presents us with some difficulties and challenges in moving that agenda forward. Table 3 of Appendix 2 provides an overview of the governance group risk assessments, and as noted in the body of the report, the ratings for a number of these groups again reflect the findings of the Best Value Audit report. And then the final appendix is Appendix 3, which is the Corporate Risk Management Improvement Plan. And that refers to risk management training and briefings. And as I said earlier, we are drafting plans to get that in place. But there has been significant changes in council, both in terms of members and in terms of chief officers. So we're looking, and we're also looking to bring forward a new council plan. So this feels like the right time to review the risk management arrangements that we have in place. And we'll be working on that over the summer recess and bring that back to members. And I'm happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. It's important that members are cited on the most critical and emerging risks to the council's functions and its services, as well as having assurance that they're being managed effectively through mitigating actions. Managing risk in a crisis is difficult, particularly with so much flux and variation in play over the last few years, so it has been very difficult to do that. There is a lot of information contained within this report, which has been scrutinised by the Audit Committee, and there was robust questioning, but as we've heard from Amanda today, that there has been some movement since that meeting, and that's been positive movement, which is good to see. It is recognised that it's also quite a technical report, and that's demonstrated in the various appendices, and therefore it may not be entirely clear to everyone, particularly the public, on what is the responsibility of members and what's the responsibility of the services around risk management, and that will be taken into account as part of the review. As a requirement for mandatory training for the Audit Committee, including a workshop on understanding risk appetite and risk tolerance, it will also give an opportunity to review the presentation of reporting on risk, so that it's clear for both members and of the public, and we can then give ourselves, we can get assurance from that that all risks are being managed effectively, and through our service management, but also through our own governance of the council. The emerging risks will continue to be a concern for us going forward. All of those are not within our gift influence, but we have to be prepared to react to them and make sure that there's mitigating actions so that prevent any harm to our citizens locally as well. The new council plan will also be able to allow us to reflect on our priorities and the risks associated with delivering on those priorities. So I'm happy that we move the report as is, but look forward to sharing with others around the various aspects of the training around risk going forward, and understanding better where we are post-COVID and the impacts to the council and the risks associated with that. So I'm happy to move the report.
Formally second the report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowes. I will open it up for any questions or comments. No, if we're content to agree the report. Oh, sorry, James.
Thanks, Cecil. Just a quick question. I don't know if Amanda covered it in summary, but on page 27, recent changes include in February 22, the UK Government Joint Terrorism Analyst Centre lowered the threat level to substantial, meaning that an attack is likely. How is that different for the radicalisation? Why is it in our report different for the trend?
Okay, Amanda.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I'm not quite sure I've picked you up because the sound wasn't great at that point. I think I covered this just in terms of saying that whilst the UK government have lowered the threat level, the reason that we have increased the risk is around the council's responsibilities in terms of the legislation that potentially is going to be introduced, and that's linked to Martin's Law, which is linked to the Manchester bombing, and it's the implications that may have for the council in terms of sort of resources, premises, compliance and monitoring. So that's the reason for the disparity between the UK government lowering their risk level and us increasing the risk level.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kerr, but I think Robert Naylor, who also deals with particularly in relation to the schools, might want to come in and supplement that. Robert?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Amanda's covered it. It does relate to Martin's Law. Martin's Law is likely to bring forward a requirement for there to be much more monitoring and supervision, stewarding of events of particular sizes. We don't know yet what that will cover, but it may well be that there are a number of gatherings of people in venues that will require us to, if you like, police them much more vigorously and carry out risk assessments that up until now have not been necessary. And as Amanda says, we don't know what the cost implications of that might be. We are waiting to see what the needs of the legislation bring for us.
Thank you, Convener. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, Siobhan?
Hi, thank you. I was just looking for a wee bit of clarity on page 35, the table, in terms of climate change. That was last updated in September 2021, and I'm just wondering how in the midst of a climate emergency, we've got limited assurances from over a year ago, why that's not more up to date. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know whether, Amanda, you want to make comment and then maybe go to Malcolm?
Thank you. So I would say that the update there has been actually quite a lot of work done which isn't fully reflected in this report, and part of that is because this is 3 months out of date. So there was some scrutiny and review of climate change in particular, which was undertaken in April. And that isn't reflected in this report because it's a straight referral from the Audit Committee report. What I would also say is that there's different levels of assurance, so that table 2 in Appendix 2, which may be the one you're referring to, I've got a different, I've got the individual report as opposed to the bigger agenda, so I'm not quite sure where the page reference is. So that's from the services assurance statements, but we do have a much more regular review of the corporate risk register, and the corporate risk register also has climate change and the delivery of the climate emergency declaration on it. For the corporate risk register, the risk is currently rated high with a target of medium, but I think, as we've discussed previously, there's a significant challenge in reaching our target risk level, and part of that is about the levels of investment that are required in this area. But I'll let Malcolm come in if he's...
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Malcolm.
Thank you. I don't have much to say other than it's my intention, I've always said, to review the activity that the council's taking forward on climate change and to bring an update within the next 6 months to council that really articulates how the council can achieve its net zero ambitions. Hopefully councillors will appreciate, I know I can't keep saying it too long, but it's still month 6 and I'm still, working my way through exactly what we've done. But Michael McGuinness has joined us in the last month, and he will be leading the climate change area as well. So together, if that's acceptable for councillors, I'll be bringing a report that gives a full update within the next 6 months, and then we can fully answer more of the questions that you would have. But I think that touching on what Amanda says, right now the council doesn't have enough money within its capital plan to deliver on the ambitions, so we do need to address that key fact as we move forward through the next budget cycle.
Thank you, Malcolm. Can we get a commitment that it will be before the end of the year that something will be brought forward?
I'm happy to make that commitment.
Because I think it really needs to be in order to help inform the budget process going forward. Okay, Siobhan, is it want to come back?
Just one further point. Given that it is out of date, and I appreciate that work has been done that hasn't been reflected in the report, which, it's unfortunate because it's great to see the good work that the council has taken, then surely, and forgive me if I'm wrong, could that not have been reflected in the sustainability environmental impact, which says that no assessment had been completed when compiling the report? Is that not a good opportunity to reflect that?
Amanda, you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the point. I suppose from my point of view, there's a process in terms of consideration by the Audit Committee and then referral to Executive. So you're seeing the report that has been considered by the Audit Committee. Normally there wouldn't be such a time lag between this, and I think that's partly due to the elections in this case. So normally you would be seeing it much quicker, and we would there wouldn't be that kind of disparity. So I think that's part of the difficulty here. But I can certainly look and get an update on where that work is, and that's helpful.
I think there's maybe a general point around the sustainability and the statements in the reports. If we go back to what was agreed by council, as those would appear very much front and centre, and I think we do need to be a wee bit more proactive about making sure that they actually are done, and reflect that the work that is going on, particularly around climate change, as we've done with the equalities going forward. So I appreciate it's something that's a bit more onerous by way of work, but it does bring much more by way of a robust report coming forward to members, and understanding the impacts, particularly of climate change, and everything we do, and embedding that going forward. So I'll see if there's any further questions that anybody has. No. With that caveat around climate change and the training that's required, are we happy to agree the report? Okay, thank you. We do move on now to item 6, which is the projected financial position for 21-22, and it's with Amanda.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to present the draft outturn position for both the General Fund and the HRA for 21-22. The reason the position's draft is because it will still be subject to the annual external audit process, which will happen during the summer and early autumn of this year. And quite often that does result in some changes to how the figures are reported and to what is reported, but they're usually relatively marginal. We hope that will be the case this time as well. So section 4.1 of the report sets out the general fund position, and that's also summarised at Appendix 1. And that highlights spend of £6.7 million lower than budget, and that reflects a £4.7 million improvement on the position forecast in February of this year. And that's quite a large movement in the year-end position, and there's a number of factors at play in that, which are set out in paragraphs 4.1.4 to 4.122, and I'll just highlight a few of those. Firstly, I would say that services were asked to take action to maintain costs within budget and to reduce expenditure where possible, and so I think we're starting to see those messages coming through in our outturns. The Teachers' Pay Award was around £900,000 less than we had set aside, but that position wasn't known until after the February projection report. The largest movement was in place services. The February report showed place services with a break-even position, but within that position there were a number of projected overspends offset with some additional income. But in the event, many of the overspends didn't materialise and income was higher than we had budgeted for. And the February report, particularly for place services, had highlighted the scope for the projection in that area to shift significantly over the last 2 months of the financial year. And that was for a number of reasons. For example, the weather, capacity issues, material issues, recruitment issues, all these things that could impact on the projection. And paragraph 4.1.13 just notes that finance are working with the service to just look at how we can improve forecasting in that area and what we can learn from this year. So members will note significant movements at paragraph 4.1.18 and 4.1.22, and those two paragraphs are connected, and that's reflecting the Scottish Government giving local authorities the option to take a loans fund debt repayment holiday, and that was part of a package of fiscal flexibilities. It was a sort of one-time only option. We could only take it for 1 year, and we had budgeted to do that in 21-22. So the general fund would have been due to repay around £7 million of debt, in 21-22, and we were allowed to take holiday of that. That was very much a one-off benefit. Section 4.3 of the report provides some information on the general fund reserves, and that links to the information at section 4.5 in terms of the impact on 22-23. So in terms of 22-23, the much improved financial position at the end of 21-22 clearly has a knock-on effect. Council had agreed to apply £5 million of reserves in 22-23. And the forecast reserves position for 22-23 was expected to be around 7.5 million by the end of the year. That's now 11.5 million. So that's clearly a better position for us to be in. But one of the key messages that I'm trying to get across in the report is the recognition of the very volatile economic environment that we are operating in just now. And the significant financial pressures that are facing the council in 22-23. The bullet points in paragraph 4.5.3 set some of that out, including the inflationary costs, not least energy pressures on pay awards, interest rate rises, which impacts the cost of borrowing, etc. So at the moment, Finance are finalising the final accounts, and those have to be published by the 30th of June. And as soon as that exercise is complete, focus then turns to updating the 22-23 projections. And that will use our best assumptions of the areas outlined above. But the position is volatile, and so it can be quite difficult to sort of pin down some of those assumptions. So we may have to do a range of sort of different scenarios. But we will be updating that position, and then we'll be bringing it to members after the recess. A positive point, which is set out in paragraph 4.5.2, notes a rebate of the NPDO insurance of 1.2 million. There are two reports on the agenda which seek to use some of that funding. The capital report, which is looking for 322,000 for increased tender costs for Kinnaird Primary School extension, and the poverty report, which is looking for £622,000 for a range of recommendations. So if I move on to the HRA, section 4.6 of the report covers the HRA, and I do want to point out an error. The outturn for the HRA is a deficit of 597,000. The report notes that that's above budget. However, actually, that's on budget. So the council had budgeted for a deficit of 597,000 for 21-22. So the HRA has actually come in on budget this year. And that means that the HRA will be carrying forward reserves of 7.2 million into 22-23. So I think to summarise, I just want to say that the main messages from this report are the 21-22 financial position for the HRA was on budget. The position for general fund was much improved, but it is likely that there'll be a number of significant calls onto that funding due to the building and sustained financial pressures that we're facing, and that we'll be bringing an update on the 22-23 financial position to members after the recess. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, for that report. And while the outturn report is better than predicted, and that is welcome, there is a continuing need for robust budget monitoring, as there's significant pressures across the public sector, and finance remains extremely challenging, and we will have the gap for next year to bridge. Last year's gap was the biggest ever that we'd faced, and while we hope that we will be in a better position this year, there will still be a significant need to find funding to bridge that. Council's not immune from the cost of living crisis, as we still have the same pressures as everyone else in that respect, and there are still a number of other issues to be resolved, none less than the pay deal with our staff. And we will have no doubt the continued desire to provide further support to our most vulnerable. we need to reflect on much of the improved position as a result of one-off savings, whether that be from vacancy management or indeed from the windfall from the NPDO insurance. But the financial climate is very volatile, and there will be call on further resources going forward. So I think we need to just take that into account when we're considering where we are. It's been very pleasing to see that there has been more robust financial management, and for the first time we've seen our children's services in an improved position, and hope that will be able to be something that we'll be able to continue going forward, and we'll be able to look to maintain the budget. But when you have services that deal with people and people's needs, it can be very variable. Similarly with the Integrated Joint Board over the years. So I'm happy to move the report as it is, noting that the improved outturn, but recognise that there are still significant pressures ahead of us, and that there continues to be the need for robust financial management going forward, and this will put us in a good position to start our preparations for next year's budget, and allow us to plan and update our medium-term financial plan. So I'm happy to move the report. Councillor Dowse.
Thank you, Convener. I welcome the report, but rather than repeating a lot of the items you've already said, can I formally second you and reserve the right to come back in, please? Okay, thank you, Councillor Dowse. I will now open it up for any questions or comments. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. Just quickly, now obviously I appreciate this is a financial position for 21-22. It's already been alluded to that we have a serious financial situation for the future. This is merely a snapshot of what's been happening. It's not a true picture going forward. The anticipated deficit for 22-23 is going to cause us severe problems when you take into account the effects of COVID, Brexit, and also the Ukraine war, and the impact that's going to have on the financial situation for everybody concerned. I noticed from the report that there's 7 areas listed as being under budget and only 2 as being over budget. And that's a positive thing on the whole, and I would like to think that services are doing all they can to arrive within budget, if not under budget. I know also that the reserves are increased from, or they're anticipated to increase from 7.5 million to 11.5 million. I'm just wondering where this additional £4 million will actually materialise from.
Okay. I'll ask Amanda if she wants to maybe repeat some of the where the 4 million came from, because I think you did detail it in your presentation, but you maybe want to maybe give a wee bit more detail on that.
Okay, thank you. I suppose the largest single movement that I'd pointed to was the Teachers' Pay Award, and that was a benefit of around 900,000. We are finding that there were sort of pockets of underspends across all the services, and a lot of that was to do with recruitment and timing of recruitment, for example. One of the areas, for example, was around mental health officers, and some underspend on that in terms of adult social work. The largest single movement was in place services, but again, that was made up of a large number of different areas, and we tried to sort of set some of those out in the report itself. So there was income in place services that was beyond what was initially expected. Part of that was resulting from the burgundy bins, in terms of having increased income from our sort of dry recyclate because higher quality in the bins. Landfill tonnages were lower than expected. We also had increased roads income from Stirling and Clackmannanshire Council. The reason for that was that we had another look at our charge out rates for some of the road works that we were doing to make sure that they were reflecting the increase we were experiencing in cost. So that provided additional income. If you look at, that's reflected in paragraph 4.1.11, which talks about £250,000 benefit in roads, street cleansing and grounds maintenance each, totalling around 760,000. The roads element was from that income. And we also had things like the £484,000 underspend in engineering design from lower lighting maintenance. So there was quite a sort of shift in the position for Place in the last couple of months, with variances all the way through. And I think that's something that we need to do a lot more work with the service, just to understand how we can improve that moving forward. But that can be quite a volatile area, I think, at the moment, particularly around things like the weather, but also recruitment, and also the supply delays in materials and the difficulties sometimes in getting contracts and tender prices agreed. So the 4 million, as I say, mainly the biggest single chunk was the teachers' pay award, and everything else was really a collection of much smaller variances right across the council.
Thanks, convener. Just so I've got this.
Alan, could you maybe move the microphone a wee bit closer, because folks online aren't hearing you very well.
Is that better?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, just so I've got this right in my own head. I understand everything that's listed in the report as far as underspends and that are concerned, and that's obviously had an effect on the reserve position. When will we have a true record of the impact of COVID, Brexit and also the Ukraine war on our budgets? When will we be getting a report coming forward detailing the increase in costs?
I think that could well be a finite report, could be extremely tall order to do, but I'll ask Amanda, and I appreciate it will be due a financial update report in August, in general, looking towards next year's budget, but when do we expect to be able to collate all of that information, if indeed we can manage to collate all that information, Amanda?
Well, I think it's quite a topical point. Audit Scotland have just issued a report which looks at COVID funding and looks at how sort of trackable and traceable that funding is in terms of what it was actually spent on, and also the difficulties in understanding what the impact of that COVID funding has been, and what the impact of COVID has been. I think initially, at the start of the COVID pandemic, we knew the costs, they were quite easily identifiable. We would have things like additional PPE costs, or we would have some costs to suppliers and third-party contractors, particularly in the IGB, and that funding was quite easily identifiable. I think now that we're moving into that sort of recovery phase, it's more difficult to identify what's a direct result of COVID, an indirect result of COVID, or what may have been happening anyway in terms of the pressures. I think equally it's quite difficult to separate out what's a result of inflationary pressures from COVID, the impact of Brexit, and also the impact of Ukraine on our costs. So we will be bringing a further report to members in August. We're also working on our financial strategy. In truth, at this point, I'm not sure the extent to which we would be able to unpick all the various elements of pressure on the budget and understand what they can be attributed to in terms of Brexit, COVID, Ukraine. But it's certainly something that we can consider when we're pulling the strategy together.
Thanks, David.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, convener. I think I appreciate why Alan's asking it, but I think he's asking a quite hard task, and probably things like inflation and things like that. Seems to be gap. It's going on. Anything you do, you get a snapshot time. So even a report written 1 week, the following week, it'll have it all listed. I think the overall position on the reserves is very good. Obviously, we had to take the 5 million off that we took last year, so that's why it goes to 16.5 million, then drops down to 11.5. So I do appreciate the question you're asking. I think it's almost an impossible ask, and I'm sure Amanda's the clever one in the room on this. But I genuinely think it's an almost impossible task to give you an accurate figure on it, because there's so many factors leading in to what you've asked for that things just change every day. Fuel costs, that you just keep adding them, to be honest with you. Thank you for doing that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowes. Is there any other questions or comments? No, happy to agree with the report. Okay, thank you. We stay with Amanda now for the 21-22 capital programme outturn. Amanda.
Thank you. Last one from me. So the previous report set out the unaudited position for the revenue budget, and this report sets out the unaudited position for the capital budget for both General Fund and HRA. So again, it's subject to external audit, and the outturn may change, albeit we wouldn't expect any significant changes. Section 5.1 of the report covers the General Fund outturn position, and that's also summarised in Appendix 1. And that shows that there was total investment of 42 million against a budget of 70 million. And what I would say is 42 million is the highest level of investment that we've experienced for quite a number of years, albeit it's 28 million under the budget. The graphics at paragraph 5.1.1 list selected projects and investments which are linked to the Council's current priorities. And in total, there was investment of £14 million across the school estate and £15 million in design, roads and transport, for example. In our finance reports, we tend to report the movement from the previous report to executive. So in this case, the previous report was presented to executive in January of this year, and we were projecting more investment at that time. So there has been a reduction of around £13 million from that January projection report, and the breakdown of that's included in Appendix 2 to this report. So previous reports to members have highlighted the issues around slippage, and this was a focus of the Best Value audit report, and the Best Value action plan set out a number of actions to address this issue, and we have got revised governance processes which have been brought in for 22-23, and we are anticipating that will help to improve the position further. So the capital programme is being reviewed, and it will be further reviewed during the summer, and that's really to ensure that the emerging issues that we have around increasing inflationary costs, for example, and also experience of contracting are captured. So again, similar to the revenue side, we will present an updated report for 22-23 to members following the summer recess. Section 5.3 of the report looks at the HRA, and that's also covered in Appendix 3. So there was total investment of around 36 million against a budget of just under 54 million. And examples of the spend are provided in the report and appendix. So that includes 7.3 million on new build housing and 7.9 million on buying back council houses and 8 million on external fabric improvements. Paragraph 5.3.4 sets out the main reasons for slippage in the housing investment programme, including things like material supply issues, labour shortages and delays to tender awards due to the inflationary pressures. So when tenders are coming in that are significantly over budget, we're having to go back and maybe value engineer them to try and get them back into closer to the budget. And it's anticipated that these kind of pressures that we're having will be increasingly experienced across both capital programmes going forward. Sections 5.5 and 5.6 of the report make the links with the Treasury management strategy and activity, and prudential indicators are included in Appendix 4. And those indicators demonstrate that the Council operated within the limits that were set in the budget for this year. Borrowing was slightly higher than forecast in the January report. In my presentation on the revenue report, I mentioned fiscal flexibilities and the ability to take a debt repayment holiday, and that's reflected in the figure in the table at paragraph 5.6.2, which shows service repayments of debt. And at the end of 2021, we took out some long-term borrowing, and that was really to try and take some advantage of lower interest rates, anticipating an increase in the rates. But we did still remain within all the budgeted limits. Capital reserves are laid out in section 6, and these show little movement in the reserves during 21-22, and that's in part due to low numbers of asset sales during the year. And finally, section 7 provides some updates on the 22-23 capital programme, and there's 3 main projects that I would bring to your attention. The first is the tender for Kinnaird Primary School, which came in at 322,000 over the budget of 1.433 million, again reflecting that upward inflationary pressure. And it's proposed that the £1.2 million insurance rebate for the MPDO project is used to fund that additional cost. Education have identified an urgent requirement for £500,000 of investment in ICT provision. There had been a bid submitted to the capital programme, but at that point funding was anticipated from the Scottish Government to support investment of ICT in schools, and the bid wasn't put into the capital budget. And whilst the funding is still expected, the amount and the timing remains unknown. So should funding not be sufficient to cover the costs, it's proposed that the investment is met from the COVID reserves that have been carried forward to support education recovery. And the third project is the ICT requirements for the refurbishment of the stadium, and that includes improvements to the Wi-Fi in the stadium and Grangemouth Social Work Office, and that work's expected to cost around £650,000. The section on reserves noted that there was 837,000 of capital receipts previously set aside as part of the Scottish Government's fiscal flexibilities packages for COVID pressures. We've recently been told that there's been a change on how that funding can be used, and so we're therefore recommending that that funding is used to meet the ICT costs. What I would say is I appreciate this is quite a complicated report. Capital and Treasury management is a really complicated area, and I appreciate there's a lot of information that's sort of been put in this report and sort of thrown at you from my presentation. Just to provide some reassurance that we do provide detailed training in this area, and we will be providing training this year that will cover this and help support members when they're scrutinising these reports going forward. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Amanda, for that. And while in the past the capital programmes maybe not been one that has been of any huge concern, obviously that we are concerned about where we are right now and the delivery of our capital programme. But as you've said, we're looking to review that to make sure that it's affordable and deliverable over the summer period. And while we are not at the level of what we would like by way of investment, there is still significant investment going into our communities, and I think it's right that we do reflect on making sure that the programme is still aligned with the council's priorities in a time when things have been changing quite significantly. Slippage has been an inherent problem, and just as we had what we thought was on top of it in a regime to address slippage, COVID came along and everything that came with it related to that, and now with the increased costs and delays in supplies, we find that we still have challenges around slippage. But again, it's about how we manage that going forward to the best effect, and making sure that we can still continue with a robust and ambitious programme, and we should never forget that we should be ambitious for our council area. The essential areas that we've identified as requiring spend, and again it's a mixed bag of what those are. And I think that the proposals around how we fund that are fairly sound and robust, and we'd be content that we find a way of taking those forward, recognising that there is still the likelihood of money coming from the Scottish Government around ICT. We were a wee bit ahead of the game on that, and being the first to actually roll out a digital programme, and I still am hopeful that we will be able to tap into that fund, and it will help that fund the ICT that is required. I understand that it's quite specific ICT that's required, and it's the long lead-in time that is giving the concerns. Housing capital programme. The increased costs again around house building is something that is going to continue to be a challenge, and it will be something I think as a council we will need to discuss at a future meeting and around how we manage that for the future, as we increased the funding for buybacks previously, which were proving to be more best value than new build. However, the challenges around being able to deliver lifetime homes and still be able to do that in an affordable manner, and recognising that there's still going to be pressures continuing. I think the review in the autumn of the capital programme is going to be one that is going to be challenging, but one that we need to do. But we note the outcome at this time, and we will look to continue to focus on the council's priorities and the emerging priorities that require the capital funding, and I have no doubt that a lot of that discussion will be around how we meet our climate change targets going forward, as that is something that has already been inherent in the programme, but there's more to be done, and it's about how we're able to do that in the most affordable manner. But I'm happy to move the report, including recommendation 3, the adjustments in the general fund as set out in section 7 of the report. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener. And there is some positive slippages in there, one being the energy efficiency street lighting delivered ahead of schedule with reduced costs. So what's not to like about that? Yes, happy to second the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. I'll open it up for any questions or comment. Siobhan?
Hi, you're going to notice a theme with me. Whilst I do appreciate that there's more than one line under the climate change implications, I would love help in understanding how the recommendation does not give rise to any material implications to our climate change targets, when there's a very obvious example of just one amongst it of building works, which in my mind would have some at least implications. So I would love some clarity on that.
Okay, I think Councillor, sorry, Mr Moody. I wouldn't wish that one particularly on you, Colin.
Thank you. I think it's important just to note that what the recommendation is that the paragraph 3 is referring to, because the climate change implications paragraph in the report is intended to set out the implications of the particular decision that the executive is being asked to reach at a particular meeting. And the decision here is not to approve the capital programme or the particular works within the capital programme. It's to note the outturn on the 21 to 22 capital programme that was already approved. So I think for me, the key point where the climate implications needs to be set out fully, and that would be totally required by the decision of the council, is where the council or the executive is taking a decision which would give rise, for instance, to expenditure on construction, which would have the climate implications. But that's not what's been done here. It's a report looking backwards on what has happened in relation to the programme that was agreed previously.
What I'll bring you in a minute, Councillor, but what may be helpful is to look at the budget reports with where we have the equality and poverty impact assessments, and that there should be a similar assessment around climate in relation to that at that time, so that members can be more informed about that decision making process. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. And thank you to Amanda for this report and the previous one, which makes rather complex financial information perhaps translucent, if not clear. But at least it's no longer opaque. You mentioned that there's going to be training provided. I had been hoping to get some significant training, being a new councillor, as I am, about the financial situation sooner rather than later, and certainly before the review, because I think it's important in a position to fully participate in the development of the both capital and revenue situation. So thank you for the offer of training. I'll take it tomorrow. Is that soon enough?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Amanda, for your reports. It's just in relation to 7.2 of the report when it's talking about ICT equipment and laptops. It reads, this takes into account the currently long lead in times for ICT equipment, with laptops, for example, taking an average of 50 weeks. So essentially a year for laptops from purchase to delivery. Is there any discussions that the council is having to try and speed up the delivery of these laptops?
I understand it's a national issue, just because of the demand, but I will bring in Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Happy to come in on that point. It is indeed a national issue. We're not alone in our difficulties in actually obtaining laptops and similar IT equipment, and there are many worldwide implications impacting on that, which I won't bore committee with. But we are in discussions with contractors about how we can speed this up. We are also looking at different ways we could possibly procure IT equipment to see if that would help us speed it up. So there are a number of actions in play by our IT team just to look at how we can speed up that process, and the time that's in the report is currently the sort of standard time that we are getting. We have had, for example, laptops orders placed for many months now, and we still don't have them delivered. So we do need to speed this up in terms of just our forward plan of what we need to make sure that we have those in place in time for when they're required. But I can assure you that committee, that we are doing our absolute best to work with providers to shorten those times as far as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Content with that, Councillor Bundy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's just a quick question, and it's in relation to 7.4 on page 58 regarding the Falkirk Community Stadium. Now, like yourself, I can remember way back when we bought Abbotsford House for £1 million. We were thinking of kitting out the stadium at that point, and I believe the estimate for doing so was about 600,000. Now, I believe that budget has increased considerably, and I think it's 1.5 million now. I'm just wondering, what are we getting for the 1.5 million if we're having to be asked for additional money now to kit out for IT.
Okay, Malcolm, are you able to take this?
Could I ask Paul Kettrick to assist me with that one?
Yep, Paul.
Yep, happy to assist, convener. The position is that we would be fitting out a shell area that's currently located with under the stands. We're also refurbishing the area that was formerly accommodated by the trust and the two offices that were previously the business gateway. All in all, the cost is advised there is just £1.5 million plus the IT costs, and that will provide accommodation for approximately 250 to 280 workstations.
Okay, is there anything more you can say around the associated IT? Oh, sorry, Amanda, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think it was just to add to what Paul was saying. So in terms of the 1.5 million, that will also cover things like some of the access control infrastructure that's required, and it will also cover things like the meeting room IT suites. So really to get the stadium up to the same kind of level as the Foundry, and to make sure there's a consistency in IT provision and that everyone can move around from one office to the other without too much complication. So the 1.5 million does include some degree of ICT provision. The ask is for some of the more kit outs of the sort of desks and things, but also that Wi-Fi provision for both the stadium and for Grangemouth Social Work Office.
Thanks, Amanda. You content with that, Councillor Nimmo?
I'm not sure, to be honest, convener. I think there's a lot more to it. I think, just thinking back, when we agreed a budget of 1.5 million, I can't remember if it was actually stipulated that there was going to be additional costs for IT at that point, or whether we just assumed that everything was going to be included in the 1.5 million.
I'm not sure if when we agreed the 1.5 that was going to encompass everything, because I think since then we've taken ownership of the rest of the stadium, and I think there's maybe been the requirement to look at some of the meeting areas and upgrade the facilities there, but I don't know whether, Paul, you can add any more to what you've said.
Unfortunately, convener, I can't add anything any further in terms of the construction works, but I know that in terms of the fit out, in terms of what we would call primary IT infrastructure, so cabling, connections and all those sorts of things are incorporated within the construction cost. As Amanda highlights, this is more in relation to the hardware that for people to use, and in the fixtures and fittings associated with that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nimmo. Are there any other questions or comments? Nope. Okay, we're happy to content to agree the report. Thank you. Moving on to tackling poverty in Falkirk, additional support and low income. And is Kenneth going to take this one? Yep. Kenneth.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, convener, and good morning to all. This is an important report. It's directly relevant to the issues and pressures being felt by our communities right now. I'm very grateful to colleagues across the council and indeed in the Health and Social Care Partnership who have contributed to this. I'm particularly grateful to my colleague Sally Buchanan, who's pulled it all together at short notice, and I think done a very good job of that. So tackling poverty is one of our priorities as set out in the Falkirk Plan. We know that COVID-19 has left a legacy of increased poverty and inequality in our communities, and we also know that the cost of living crisis is greatly exacerbating these problems. So there is a clear need to act on this now. We also know that this is not something that we dealt with quickly or easily. So the proposals set out in this report represent, I would suggest, a positive realistic and considered starting point for this work. And there will clearly need to be a continued focus on tackling poverty over the period of this council. The paper provides council with options for additional financial and in-kind support to low-income households designed to help with the cost of living crisis, while also encouraging additional take-up of support to improve household finances. And the report outlines both the scale of the cost of living crisis, the work already being undertaken in Falkirk to tackle poverty and support benefit take-up, the important and complementary work being taken forward by the Health and Social Care Partnership within the ADP, the introduction of the Whole Family Wellbeing Fund, which will also be supporting the same families in many cases. It then sets out a series of 5 proposals for taking this work forward. I'm just going to briefly go through each of these. So the first is round about allocating budget to a second round of the household support funds. So at 525, we set out the work previously done between January and April of this year, the support we were able to provide to over 1,000 low-income households, and Appendix 1 to the report provides some examples of the difference that made, the really important difference that made. And at 5.26 is a series of examples of the kind of support and engagement that can flow from the engagement we've had with these families through the Household Support Fund. And we feel it's really important that we build on and increase that work. So on the next item on the agenda in this report, we have proposals in relation to the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery funding, the LACER funding. That proposes at least an additional 273,000 of funding towards household support, depending on which option we move forward on in that regard. We feel that will be fairly rapidly used up, and the proposal here is an additional 250,000, which would allow the Household Support Fund to open potentially through to the end of March 2023. The second proposal is about additional resources to increase the uptake of benefits and in-kind support, and this recognises that the demand for support to maximise income is increasing as more and more people and more families feel the impact of the rising costs of living. So the proposal here is to recruit an additional 4 officers to support this over the next 2 years, and the precise scope and remit of these roles is being developed. The estimated cost is 192k a year, and recognising excuse me, the significant amount of this work will relate to Falkirk Council tenants. The proposal is that 50% of this is funded from the housing revenue account. The third element is about access to sport and leisure for low-income households. The report sets out the basis of the Go card, the concessionary card that was in place in relation to the Falkirk Community Trust, and which continues. The proposal is that the Go card will be extended to include anyone in receipt of an income-related benefit. That's in line with the council's existing charges and concessions policy. It is also suggested that the benefits of the card be amended to provide free access to swimming in terms of supporting people living in a low income and benefiting physical and mental health and well-being. And the cost for that is anticipated in the region of 180k a year. It would be also our intention to support Go Card applications across our library service in terms of increasing access and availability. Paragraph 5410 in the report then suggests an alternative approach that we could move forward on, and this would be about working in partnership, not least with colleagues in the Health and Social Care partnership, to develop an alternative concessionary scheme that would be more focused on those receiving income related benefits and allow additional focus on supporting those who need our support to the greatest extent. So at the moment, that is a proposal. We have a more open recommendation in relation to this item, and we'd really welcome members' engagement and input into that. The fourth element relates to school meal payments to pupils from low-income households. These are payments made during the holidays. So since March 2020, Falkirk has paid £3.50 per day in relation to this, and we've also extended the entitlement to those on our local concessionary scheme and those in receipt of clothing grants. So the Scottish Government funding in respect of this for the narrow group is effectively £2.50 per day. So our more generous daily rate and our wider entitlement means that we have a shortfall in funding, as is set out in section 5.52 of the report. So there's a number of options for us going forward, but our view as officers is very clear on this, that in the context of the cost of living crisis, it would not be appropriate to reduce our enhanced payment at the current time. So we would therefore propose to continue that payment over the coming summer and the October holiday to maintain support to low-income families, and the cost of that will be an additional £344,000. The fifth proposal relates to the work to promote the uptake of benefits and in-kind support. Our intention to develop a Falkirk-wide campaign to raise awareness of the financial and in-kind support that is available, and the details of that are to be developed. Some initial proposals at 5.6 and 0.1, and any additional costs associated with this will be met from within the existing Fair Falkirk budget. So the financial implications overall are set out section 7. You'll note the proposed use of the COVID Education Recovery Reserve for the school meal payments. The remaining proposals total 814,000, and then this relates back to the NPDO insurance rebate as set out in item 6, which we considered previously in the report, that 622,000 should be funded from that, with 192,000 from the housing revenue account. So the proposals which have been pulled together represent a really important, as I say, first step to improve our focus on addressing poverty and give what is really much needed support in the context of the cost of living crisis. This will support both council services and our community planning partners to focus on addressing poverty, increase the uptake of benefits and support that can reduce poverty in the longer term. So the recommendations are set out at paragraph 2.1. You'll note the fifth recommendation that relates to the continuation of this work being considered as part of the budget setting process. Happy to take any questions. Convener and colleagues on the call will support me in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth, for that. And I just want to say a personal thanks to officers across the council for the work that's been put in to pull this report together. It is something that started off as part of our poverty strategy, and as funding became available throughout the year from Scottish Government and through obviously the Westminster Government, but also looking at our own resources. It's taken a real feat to pull all the services together on this, but I think going forward as one council in this approach is the right way to go. We all feel the impacts of the cost of living rises right now, some more so than others, and many who have no or little by way of personal reserves or resilience to help them see them through this particularly difficult period, more so after the last few years and the impacts of COVID. Poverty and mitigating the impacts is a key priority for us as a council, and that's reflected in the council's current corporate plan and the Falkirk plan and the poverty strategy. All of those will be updated as we are now in a new council, and we have to develop that new council plan going forward, and I'm sure it will remain a priority. This report demonstrates that we are committed to tackling poverty, but across all our services. We know that we cannot address poverty from silos or as a single team. We've seen the benefits of the collaborative working, helping us to get through the pandemic and in the recovery progress. This will enable us to focus on supporting those most at need. The £1 million investment proposed establishes a platform across the council services and our partners that will provide financial and in-kind support and encourage engagement with wider support services, which can then help to sustain people over the longer term. We need to do this now in order to support those experiencing poverty and prevent more people from going into poverty, particularly those that are in work. Currently, we have 1 in 4 of our children trapped in poverty, and we must do all we can to make sure that that figure doesn't increase any further, using what resources we have available to us locally, tapping into Scottish Government and lobbying UK Government for more resources and policy change. Currently, around 13,000 households in Falkirk are living on a low income, in or at significantly at risk of poverty, with just under 7,000 children living in poverty, and that's not good enough, and we need to do all we can to address this. The impact of the package of support will enable around 5,306 children or young people benefiting from the school meal holiday payments. Household Fund will see an additional 250,000 that will support around 1,375 households, which equates to around just under 1,400 children. The additional officer resource will work with these households and through outreach to identify others to make sure they're getting all the benefits that they're entitled to, reducing that unclaimed benefit of 38 million, which we know is in Falkirk. As well as increased intake, as well as increased take-up of in-kind support of unclaimed benefits, including free bus travel, childcare, leisure access, improving people's quality of life and sustaining families, many of who will have 1 or more adult working. Current Go cards are available to around 51,000 individuals. If this was extended to include low income concessions, it would be available to around 30,000 individuals, and currently the Go card take-up is just 3,500. I've got a couple of questions I would just like to ask. While I would agree that we should be seeking to offer this free swimming, I just wanted to explore a wee bit more about the suggestion of a new or additional concessionary card scheme. I remain to be convinced of the need for an additional card, but it's noted in the report that it would enable better targeting of support. I'd like to know a wee bit more about how that might work and how our partners would be able to come into this and perhaps extend the services that would be available to those, particularly in low incomes, highlighting that we would want to limit any stigma associated with that. So I just wonder if there's a wee bit more could be explained on that, and how that might work. I think, Sally, would you be able to take that? Sorry. All right, sorry, Kenneth.
I'm certainly quite happy to come in on that one if that's okay. Yes, so the current Go Card scheme is available to people on a low income, but also to households or those individuals with disabilities and anyone over the age of 65. It offers reduced access to leisure. However, if we look to remove completely costs of leisure to all of those groups, then anyone within those categories could get free access. This would mean that we would lose income from households who aren't living in poverty, those over 65 and some with disabilities. What we could do is introduce a new scheme that would be focused. We could keep that scheme running, still offering the reduced access, but alongside it, you could introduce a new scheme which would be available to households who get income-related benefits. Now, this would not rule out over 65s or households with disabilities who are in receipt of income-related benefits, but it would mean that we would know that anyone who had that card would be living on a low income. We could then use that to prove eligibility for potentially free access to swimming and other leisure activities. And I think if we took that approach, it could then potentially be used by other services and organisations, because it would offer a really low stigma way of proving that entitlement for a concession or free access. For example, we've been working with partners on the targeting of free activities for kids over the summer holidays. We could see that in future, this kind of card could be used by local sports clubs, for example, as a really simple way of identifying young people who could be given that free access alongside households who can afford to pay for activities. At the moment, if one of our sports clubs wanted to do that kind of thing, and we could potentially fund those free places, they're left with the difficulty of trying to identify who should be eligible. We do that at the moment through our schools, where teachers and support workers can put forward kids, but this could be a really simple way to widen that out, where actually, you know, a family can prove their eligibility for that free access by simply subtly showing that card. The sports club would know what that card means, and then actually the kid could participate for free alongside kids that were paying for the same activities, which is a really nice way of delivering those activities and supporting those who can't afford to access them. So that's where the idea of coming back with a kind of more targeted card which validates that low income could then be used within council. We could certainly use it within libraries, for example, to give access into some of the more premier paid for events, but giving free access into those. But I think it could then be widened out to be used by partners as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Sally, and I'll take a view as we go into the debate from members about whether or not that is an option we want to consider going forward. Other question I've got is the report has a significant short-term investment to support people in poverty, but how would you see that delivering benefits over the longer term, and how can that then be mainstreamed into the council as a whole?
Again, I'm quite happy to come in on this one if that's okay. Yeah. Okay, so, well, for example, the Household Support Fund is very much designed to provide short-term relief because there is a financial payment there, but it's designed to incentivise engagement with support agencies, you know, things like welfare benefits. If we can offer that short-term payment, we'll encourage people to engage with our services, and we'll build that kind of trusted relationship with the individual. And that then helps our frontline officers to then, you know, encourage them to take up further help, you know, things like taking them through simple checks, income maximisation to check that they're getting what they're entitled to, or having a conversation with them about their debt. You need to get to a certain level of trust before someone will open up around that. But because we've given that payment, we've developed that relationship, you can then, you know, provide debt advice there to help reduce their monthly costs. Encourage them to take up employability support that might help them progress in work or take up new employment opportunities. All these services can help improve someone's situation over the long term and potentially bring them out of poverty. So you're using that Household Support Fund as a bit of a carrot to incentivise that engagement and then build the relationship to encourage take up of other services. Other longer term benefits of the approach detailed in the paper are things like by removing the costs, reducing or removing costs associated with leisure activities should promote uptake of leisure for people, and ultimately that should help with promoting physical and mental well-being that ultimately could reduce income-related health inequalities further down the line and the additional costs and demands that brings onto the health services. So if we can help encourage people on a low income to take up physical and leisure activities, improving health and well-being, that really is earlier intervention that will actually remove down costs to other parts of the public sector further down the line.
Thanks, Sally. I may ask Kenneth about how that can then be mainstreamed into council as policy. Would that be a refresh of our poverty strategy?
I think it's both about the refreshment of our poverty strategy specifically, but also it's about our corporate plan. I mean, as a council, we need to take a view as to our priorities moving forward over the next 5 years. You mentioned the council plan yourself, convener, and if this is going to be a major focus for us, and the position that our low-income families in our communities find themselves in suggests this. There are very strong reasons why this should be a major focus for us. Then it's about, as a council, getting both from a policy perspective and from a implementation perspective, getting officers and members behind this to ensure that it is a significant area of focus. And we have the ability to do that as long as we are joined up and coordinated and resourced, and ensure and agree that this is a priority for the council. So I think that initially there's that at that council plan level, we need to have a very clear line in the back of the Falkirk plan, a very clear line about how important this is to us as a council, and then that feeds right through, both in terms of strategy such as the poverty strategy, but also then it has to be fundamental to our budget considerations. We don't underestimate the challenge we have in terms of financial sustainability. But if, as the council, we're saying, you know what, poverty is really important, we're going to focus on that, then as members, you know that has implications for other areas of service, other potential priorities where we won't be able to resource them to the same extent.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. I've got one final question. Section 5.3.3 mentions performance measures to capture impact, and I think it's important that we do sense check to make sure that the investments that we're making actually are making a difference, so that we can make sure that that the strategy to provide the support and financial assistance to those experiencing poverty is reaching families who are impacted most. And I appreciate these are still to be developed, but I don't know whether you'd be able to give an indication of the sort of things they might include. Again, that might be yourself, Sally.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as you say, we do need to do some work on this to make sure that we're capturing the difference that this investment would make. But it'll include simple things like the number of people who engage with the services. But I think it needs to then try and capture the outcomes of that engagement as well. So, where we can detail actually the financial gain when someone ends up getting an additional benefit because of that engagement, and actually then we identify they're eligible for something else. There's a financial value attached to that. That sort of information is already captured by our welfare benefits team, but I think we need to make sure we're capturing that wider across the council through our engagement. And I think we also need to make sure that we're capturing that take up of the more kind of in-kind support, things like the free bus travel. If we're engaging with someone and they've got kids and you're saying, well, if your kid's got that free bus travel yet, can we help you get that set up? That's got a genuine value in reducing those day-to-day costs and encouraging supporting well-being, because actually now the kids can travel travel, for leisure, for skills development, for social activities, again helping to reduce income relating health inequalities. So I think all that in-kind support, we need to make sure we're capturing that as well. But I think we need to invest a bit of time in coming up with a framework, performance framework for this this investment that looks at capturing all of those bits and at all points of engagement, whether that's council, health and social care, potentially into health as well. You know, make sure we're really and our communities, and make sure we're capturing as much of that added value as possible.
Okay, thank you, Sally, and thank you for bearing with me with these questions. I'm happy to move the recommendations and leave it open at this moment to get people's views whether or not we look at a concessionary card specific, but I would certainly like to see that the free swimming and access for low income is taken forward, particularly for this summer. As I think that would be a significant benefit to families as well. But I'll move the recommendations with the caveat to come back to that once I've got people's views on that. And I will then open things up. Councillor Sinclair.
Hi, I don't know if you're looking for a seconder at this moment in time, but I'd be happy to second that and second the report and reserve the right to come back in if my voice lets me.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Yeah, you're sounding a wee bit deep today. Okay, I will now open it up. Councillor Hannah.
At this stage, I'm not sure if at this stage that I would like to move an amendment to the proposal. It's not an amendment that significantly changes the recommendations of this report. What it does, I hope, is to clarify what is perhaps implicit in the report, that this is only the first step on the way. The problems of poverty and deprivation are with us big style and are increasing, and I think it's important that we address this throughout the entire period of this council. So I did circulate the proposed amendment. Has everybody had a chance to see it?
Certainly, I've circulated it to my members, but I don't know whether, Jack, if you've got a copy to put on the screen.
In the interests of openness and transparency, I made sure that everybody, or at least I think I made sure that everybody who should have a copy did. The issue here is to say that it should be part of a longer term strategy. I also think that the decision makers and those in the whole social policy field sometimes talk about poverty. I do it myself. I have spent my entire life passionate about dealing with the problems of poverty, deprivation and inequality of opportunity. But sometimes the people that we are trying to give assistance to don't necessarily regard themselves as being in poverty. They don't necessarily regard themselves as being the poor. And in this context, particularly now with the cost of living going up, as you said earlier on yourself, it affects all of us to some extent and some to a greater extent. I would like to see us look at this report as a starting point for a much wider income maximisation strategy, maximising the incomes and reducing the outgoings, not only of the poorest people in the Falkirk area, but those on middle and average incomes who are also hurting because of the current problems and the problems that are going to go on for the forthcoming 5 years of our council term. So if everyone has had a chance to read the amendment, it's that a longer term strategy for income maximisation be developed, aligning with the Fairer Falkirk strategy to include the extension of advice services and outreach work. And this is an important part of it. There are some areas where we do have advice services and there are some areas where we don't. And we really need to make sure that we reach the parts that our strategies are maybe not reaching at the moment. So that it should be to look at the extension of advice services and outreach work to communities that don't have easy access to the advice services. And we should also give, in addition to that, in the longer term strategy, give consideration to additional support and collaboration with the third sector. It's not only our own council services that provide assistance in this regard. We also fund a number of voluntary sector organisations, and they are really important. So I think it is really important that we look at all the different things. You said earlier on yourself that we need to embed this approach within all our services. We also need to embed it across the whole of the sector to try and ensure we get the maximum benefit for the maximum number of people in the Falkirk area. So I would like to move that amendment and hope that everyone could support it.
Okay, thanks. And do you have a formal seconder? Don't all fight about it. Okay. Okay, Siobhan. I don't have any concerns about the amendment. I'm happy that be an enhancement to the recommendations before us. And I've not had any feedback, certainly from my members, otherwise. James?
No, we're happy with the add-on to 0.6.
Billy? Your
Happy with
thoughts?
it, mate. Happy.
Okay,
Can you
thanks,
hear me?
Billy. Yeah, I can hear you.
Aye. Happy
Okay,
with the
thank you.
amendment. Yeah.
Okay, on that, we will move to any further questions or comments in relation to the report. I've got James, then I'll come back to you, Siobhan.
Thanks, Convener. Just first, Kenneth, on page 69, to allocate 192,000 for 4 staff. And we've said that we've not got the job titles there yet. That's 48 grand ahead. We didn't know what job titles they're going to get. When will we know when the job titles will be available? Quite happy to support the recommendation, just that we'd like to know when the job titles would be ready to see and approve.
Okay, Kenneth?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I think I'll turn to Kenny, perhaps on this one, who's probably got the best able to update us on that.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Convener. Happy to, and hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, we do have various at the present time, Councillor. We're looking to have this implemented with job titles by the summer. It will be something in the lines of somewhat with welfare and support, but the finite detail of the title has not been concluded yet. But we will be working with partners from our HR department to make sure that we have that as soon as possible, and happy to bring back to committee or directly when we have that. But we'll certainly, on the back of today, have something in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, James.
Thanks. It's a lot of money to pay out, and we didn't know what they're going to be doing. But fine, I'm quite happy for it if Kenny wants to come back to me directly. The second question regarding on page 69 again on point 4, the £3.50 a day payment for free school meals. What happens to this £3.50 if a child is off for some reason? Do they get that the next game day, or do they lose that?
I think it's made as a payment, but I'll go to Mr. Naylor.
Yeah, there's a bank's payment made in advance of the summer holidays. So there's the total number of days that constitute the summer holidays. There's £3.50 per day paid into the family's bank account.
Right, thanks for that, Robert. On page page 75, 5.2.5, something that Anne alluded to in our amendment. And we're glad that we're supporting the low-income families. My concern is the families that work and just miss being classed in that category. How can we help these families?
I think these are classified as low-income families, but Sally, you may be able to explain a wee bit more around the household support fund.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. And yeah, it's worth pointing out that of the 1 in 4 kids that are living in poverty in our area, I think that's around 60% of those are now, in working households. So this is certainly not just about people who are out of work. The previous round of the Household Support Fund was available to people who were working but on a low income. So we did have, even if they weren't in receipt of an income-related benefit, we had a kind of tool that staff could use to look at their income. It was slightly more complicated, and that's where our hubs and advice services staff were really helpful with this, that they could look at someone's income and say, yes, that's income, they are on an equivalent low income and they are eligible for that fund. But it also then gives you that opportunity to work with that household again to say, well, are you taking up everything that's available? The free bus travel for kids, for example, is available to everybody. So, that's where actually make sure you've got that in place, make sure you're not paying for travel for the kids. That'll all help. So I agree that we need to focus on those that need it most, but that's widening with the cost of living crisis, and I think that comes back to that income maximisation. Where anyone's entitled for a benefit, let's see if we can encourage them to take it, and that really helps maximise incomes right across the board and help everybody out.
Thanks, Sally. You've led on to my next question, my last question. In page 75, 5.2.6, regarding free bus passes for under 22s. How many have we got in Falkirk at the moment? Because I'm hearing from a lot of people that are finding it difficult to fill the forms in to get the bus passes.
Okay, I don't know if that's one that Sally can answer. It would be someone from our transport planning, unless I'm looking across the piece to see if there's any officer there that can. Robert?
Yes, we are aware that some young people are having difficulty processing them, and we've asked our secondary schools to have a bit of a push in the last couple of weeks of term to assist those that need it, to try and get the rate of conversion between application and granting of the card up.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Convener. I've something else about buses, but I'll speak to you separately.
Okay, thank you. Siobhan?
Hi, I would just appreciate a slightly clearer explanation of how we can spend close to £1 million and have no rise on impacts on climate.
Okay. Kenneth, you want to take this one?
Thank you. I suppose I think back to the response that Colin made earlier on in the meeting. So in terms of the climate change implications, if we think through the specific proposals that are in front of us in terms of providing more money to households which are in the greatest need, so the household support fund, that kind of emergency funding, the allocation of money to bring in new staff to support the take-up of benefits, the proposal in relation to free swimming, or indeed the proposal in relation to free school meals. I think it would be exceptionally difficult to draw a line from that to specific climate change impacts. So, you know, I understand the concern and the fact that we need to be considering that at all points. I just think in relation to the kind of proposals that are here, it'd be exceptionally challenging to understand what that direct impact might be. I'm not sure that answers Siobhan's question. She may wish to come back.
Okay, Siobhan, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I do appreciate the complexities of it. But again, you know, we've recognised that it's a crisis that we're in at this time. And if we're planning to move towards net zero in the next few years, although it is complex, I'm sure there are people smarter than I am who could at least address it to give us a sense. So I would just certainly appreciate that going forward in any of the reports.
Okay, Kenneth, you wanted to come back as well.
Yes, I mean, absolutely, and there is a climate crisis. The Council has acknowledged that. We've stated our intention to act rapidly to do that. We've already seen the real challenges in relation to that, not least in relation to funding in our capital programme, whereby actually if we're prioritising the climate crisis, then, as I said previously in relation to another matter, we're necessarily deprioritising other issues. I suppose with a report like this, my thinking about it was that we've got an issue in relation to poverty where we need to act now and we need to move quickly on it. If the actions proposed in the report had a clear and obvious impact on the climate issue, then we would have needed to done some further analysis and it might have taken more time to come back to it. But there isn't that clear and direct impact. And I suppose we're always making judgments about things, aren't we? So this is important, so we bring it forward. Now the climate change issue is important, so we need to bring that forward at an early stage, but we're always going to be making balanced judgments. So Malcolm has undertaken to come back to the Council with a comprehensive report in relation to climate change before the end of the year. In the interim, we will be taking a whole series of decisions as an executive, as a council, which are important for the communities and people of Falkirk. In the interim, we need to do the best we can to understand the climate implications of that, but we still need to press ahead on critical issues, and pressing ahead on poverty is clearly one of them.
Okay, Siobhan, you may not be happy, but are you content just now?
Content, perhaps, for now. And I do appreciate, and of course no one would argue that we need to take decisive action on tackling poverty. It's a big issue. Arguably, I would argue that it's those who are most vulnerable in society that are going to be impacted most by the climate crisis. To ignore one at any stage of the game, it's counterintuitive. And I understand the complexities, but I think that really we could be doing better at every step to address climate in relation to all of our decisions. So I don't think you have to ignore one to do that. Like I say, you're not sacrificing one for the other, but informed certainly seems to be the least we could expect.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on. I've got Anne and then I've got James and I've got you.
You'll not be surprised, given that everybody in this physical room and in the virtual room knows about my passion about the issue of the problems of poverty and deprivation, that I want to say a little more. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to the staff who have brought forward this report. It was brought forward quite quickly in response to a cost of living emergency, as well as a longer term interest in the problems of poverty. And really appreciate the work that officers have done in quite a short time scale to bring this forward for us. It is just a start, and there will be a great deal more that we're going to have to do. I think in answer to James's issue, in terms of the benefit maximisation, the income maximisation part of this report, it will impact on people in work and self-employed people, as well as those who are not in work, and quite significantly. 1 in 3 people don't get the income-related benefits they're entitled to, and that's income-related benefits like the universal credit, which does apply to people both in and out of work. 1 in 3 people who are entitled to the pension credit, that's for people over the age of 66, are not getting it. There's £38 million, as it says in the report, unclaimed, and that's only in relation to income-related benefits. It doesn't cover all the benefits that are for people with disabilities and so on. And I'd like to come on and say another big thank you to people not here in terms of the health and social care side. It's a really important part of this report that there's going to be bedding into health and social care processes the income maximisation for older people and for people with disabilities. That will make a fundamental difference to many, many thousands of people. And that will be a long-term thing. And yes, we do have to engage with health staff as well. My experience is that health staff are very, very familiar with the problems of poverty and the impact that has on the health, both mental and physical health of individuals. Thank you again to the staff for doing this so quickly, because there is a very real need to get some work done over the summer to try and maximise benefit take-up by people who are entitled to pension credit or universal credit, because the monies that were announced by the government, by Rishi Sunak, in terms of the £650 for people on low incomes, goes to those people who are on those benefits. So you have to get onto those benefits in order to get your share of that money. So it really is important that over the summer, and I appreciate that we're giving a huge amount of work to some of our staff, but thank you for stepping up to take this on. This report and the impact of these changes is not just going to be on individuals. It will be substantially on individuals and their individual incomes, but it's also going to have a substantial impact on the local economy, and I think we need to recognise that too. Every pound in the pocket of low-income families doesn't get spent on buying yachts, it doesn't get spent on stocks and shares, it doesn't get put into offshore accounts. It gets spent on local goods and local services, and that really impacts on local businesses. So I would like to see, when you're looking at the impact of the changes here, that we don't just look at the question of how much income is coming into the pockets of individuals, but also we look at the local economy impact and the community wealth building impact that it has. There are studies that suggest that every pound in the pockets that's spent in the local economy actually generates around £4 in a knock-on effect. And so we need to recognise that and look at it. In terms of the community wealth building, in terms of resilience and sustainability, there are a lot in this report that is going to improve matters for the future. Just on your one point, Cecil, about the Go card and concerns about the stigma, I think we have to be very careful in every single thing that we put into place, that we are not creating a stigmatizing process. The process is equally as important as what we're doing. So you have to have a card that is exactly the same for low-income people as it is for non-low-income people. Within the free school meals service, schools and education have done a really good job to try and minimise the stigma associated with that. That really is important. But also the processes. We need to begin to look at making processes as easy, as transparent and as accessible as possible. So I could talk at much greater length, but I'm aware that people are probably getting about ready for a break. So I'll stop at that point and say thank you to all for this report.
Thank you, Anne, and your points are very well made. I'll go to James and then to you.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to just start by thanking Siobhan for her comments about the link with poverty and climate change. And I do think that we can address these issues with some of joint investment, the same investment. So, for example, energy efficiency in housing, that would bring down the cost of energy, and that would be a sustainable way to tackle this. I know there is a large output of cost to do that, but I think if we want to be ambitious and reach the net zero targets that the Council has agreed upon, then this is the ambition that we have to show. But I do have one question on this report, which is on point 5.4.8 on page 78, and it's about the cost of the Go card, anticipated to be around £180,000 for 22-23, but then it says there'll be monitoring about uptake and cost and about any risk that that might bring. So I was just wondering, what percentage of uptake is the £180,000 based on?
Okay, thank you for that, James. Robert, are you able to take that?
I'm not able to give a definitive answer to that in terms of a percentage. It's a calculation that colleagues in the former trust have done, whereby if there's more free access, there's the potential for that to reduce the number of people that are accessing, that are paying. So it's to be fair, an estimated calculation, and a subsequent report would be able to say whether or not there has been that change in the income flow or not.
And that would be the risk that you would be highlighting, that it may cost more than that, and therefore you may have to come back to council at some point and say, I need you to cover this cost because this is the impact of it. So I think that's kind of where it is at the moment. It's a wee bit suck it and see in this respect, but I think it's the right thing to do just now, just for a number of reasons, health and well-being, and also to help out families, particularly over the summer, where it gives an opportunity for activities for young people to actually go out and do that's not going to impact on the family income.
Thank you.
Ewan?
Test out this mic, it's been playing up. So I think my question is mainly for Robert. I was quite reassured to hear that there was a big push in the secondary schools over the uptake of free bus travel for under 22s. However, I do have some concerns because, like Councillor Kerr, I have heard from many ward residents as well as the wider youth community that there has been difficulty in the process, as well as limited accessibility and information around where to take the bus pass. I'm just interested to find out if we're monitoring uptake and the efficacy of those pushes. Also, whether we're monitoring the demographics of people who are taking it up. So obviously school students, potentially people in further education or people who are employed, because I do think that that might give a key indication of where pressure needs to be put on in order to find out how to increase uptake in this regard. So whether there's any initiatives with major employers in the area or those known to have a heavy reliance on public transport. And also what our plans are to make sure that uptake is continued over the summer as well as when we're coming back to school, because I do have concerns that if we don't see a massive uptake over the summer and an increase in the uptake anyway, that people will get into sort of commuting plans that mean that they might not necessarily uptake the bus pass, for example, just relying on cars, as well as echoing Siobhan's point on climate change. I think that this is one of the areas where it's quite clear this uptake and income maximisation programme does have climate change impacts. Cheers.
Okay, thank you, Ewan. Robert?
in terms of the specific things that the councillor has mentioned, I think the answer would be that what we have been doing is making young people aware that they are entitled to get this card, and that if they wish assistance in completing the application process, we are there to help. CLD will help those that come forward over the course of the summer. But in terms of monitoring on a demographic basis, and some of the other things that the councillor suggested, we're not currently doing it in that way with that level of detail, but maybe happy to talk to councillor after the meeting regarding any specific proposals you might want us to consider.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Ewan?
Yeah, thank you. I'd definitely be interested in that. I also note that there, in the more general part of 5.2.6, that there is a call for engagement, and I would definitely emphasise that it'd be good for the council and myself in my role as Young People's Champion to work with the fantastic members of the Scottish Youth Parliament, who I know have a lot of energy and interest in making sure uptake is high over the summer. So definitely interested in speaking after the meeting. Cheers.
There is also the opportunity with the suite of performance indicators that's to be developed, that more information to help evidence the impacts of the investment, but also what's needed in the longer term might be able to help with that. Okay, as we've no any other indications to speak at this time, I'm going to put a suggestion that the recommendations are as read along with the amendment, add to that, but to recommendation 3, that we provide free swimming access to people in low income at a cost of £180,000, but ask that a further report be brought back on what a concessions card may look like and to how that could be implemented before any decision is made on that, just so that we can see what that looks like and how it might actually operate, taking into account the concerns that certainly I've got, I've raised and Anne has indicated is not something that then creates stigma or highlights any inequalities. But we could see what that actually looked like and the potential benefits that might bring with it. So I'm going to put that proposal, and happy to take any comment on that. Are people content with that? Yep. And content to therefore approve the recommendations as amended? Thank you. I'm going to take a 10-minute comfort break for folks, and I'll just allow anybody who wants a cup of coffee and to refresh yourself. So we can come back just about 12:10. Okay, folks, if we can come back, please. Okay, thank you. We move on to agenda item 9, and it is the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery or LACER Fund report, and it's Malcolm Binney that's going to take this one.
Thank you, convener. This report updates executive on options for the use of Falkirk Council's share of the Scottish Government's £80 million COVID Economic Recovery Fund, which is 2.29 million in Falkirk's case. In line with the government guidance, we're proposing to support local business as well as low-income households. The report outlines options, but I can now confirm that the consultation undertaken with businesses and the public means that option 2 at page 90 would be the one that officers would be recommending. And that would see that nearly £1 million of direct payments to 13,000 low-income households undertaken, with each household receiving £75. In addition, £318,000 would go to the Household Support Fund for those experiencing significant hardship. Local business would receive nearly £1 million of support in a variety of different grants, and a number of modern apprentices would be recruited to assist in the operation of the scheme. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Jackie MacArthur, Karen Smith, Sally Buchanan and Kenny Gillespie for their assistance in pulling together this report. Officers worked at pace to review a number of ideas, and I think what's proposed is a positive and beneficial offering to the Falkirk area and the residents who live here.
Okay, thank you for that, Malcolm. Again, the share of this fund is very welcome as part of our the Economic Recovery Fund, and aligns the distribution of the funding aligns with our Economic Recovery Plan, action plan locally, and it provides targeted support. And as part of our Falkirk plan, which again is supported across the piece by our community planning partners, making it very cross-cutting. We've already spoke about the household support that's reflected in the poverty report, but further support is obviously provided in other ways to help mitigate the impacts of poverty through the business support, and enabling them to be more sustainable businesses as they recover, which will in turn help to maintain jobs, provide opportunities for business to start to make that transition to net zero, as well as digital support, making them more sustainable and increase their profit margins, as we see much more of the businesses downsize and become single person management. Supports are critical to not just Falkirk Town Centre but all our town centres across the district at this time, as they've all been impacted as a result of COVID and of the cost of living rises, and it will give a boost to the local economy at this time when things are so volatile. Again, Anne highlighted that within the previous report, that those that are on low incomes or on benefits have the greatest disposable income and are more likely to spend local, because of it's basically spent on essentials, and that in turn will help sustain our local economy much more as well. The distribution of the funding, again, as Malcolm's highlighted, we was given the opportunity between a direct payment and the Falkirk District gift card, and following the consultation, option 2 of not using the gift card has been the one that's recommended. While I continue to support the gift card, the Love Local, Spend Local Shop initiative, our gift card is still in its early stages of development and is not as developed as others throughout the country. But I think the targeted support of the direct payment gives far more spending power and opportunities for families, as the gift card would be quite restrictive in choice and is not available throughout the district to the same. So I'm happy to go with the outcome of that particular consultation. It's a package of support that should actually help make a difference, and one that aligns with other work streams, particularly as we'll look at what's coming next in the Shared Prosperity Fund around that employability aspect. So I'm happy to move the recommendations as in section 2, along with the agreement to look at the agreement with the outcome of the consultation in relation to the direct payment, and hope we can start to see some of the benefits of this laser funding out into the communities very quickly. Councillor Gardner.
Happy to say, Convener.
Thank you. I will now open it up for questions and comment. James?
It again goes back to the climate change implications, which has been talked about already. In section 3 on page 86, it does say there will be a positive impact, and if we do go with option 2, that will be because there's £318,000 going into the Low Carbon Energy Efficiency Fund. It would be helpful if we could get a more detailed breakdown of the reduction to carbon, so we can find out the costs of that and if it's value for money, if there's alternative ways to reduce carbon at a greater rate for the same amount of money. So yeah, it's great that it says positive impact, but how we've come to that conclusion would be very helpful.
Okay, I'll go to Malcolm.
Thank you, Convener. I probably might seek some guidance from Mr. Moody in relation to the way the report is presented, because the way I've approached it is in terms of the climate change implication. It's the way the recommendations of this report impact upon the council's climate change aspirations, and therefore the measurements and our ambitions to meet a carbon neutral target by 2030. But if we are looking now to seek to review impacts beyond how the council monitors its own carbon targets, then I guess I'll take that on board and definitely go forward. But that will be challenging in a way to bring hard factual information to the executive.
Colin?
Yes, thank you, Convener. And I think Malcolm's point is just what is the extent of the climate change implication that has been called for in this particular paragraph. And I think from my own perspective, it is a broader issue than simply the impact of the council's impact itself from the council's own activities, because the council's reach stretches much further than what it does itself. The council procures, the council regulates, the council plans. So all of these have implications for climate change. I'm not sure that issue necessarily goes directly to the point that Councillor Bundy is making, though, in that the report already identifies that there's a positive impact in relation to climate change. And as I understand it, the question is more, how have we come to the view that it has a positive impact, and just a little more explanation as to why it's positive.
Sure, thank you for that. Well, I guess as the report outlines, the particular investment in the Falkirk Low Carbon Energy Efficiency Fund, which would offer grants of up to £10,000 to local businesses to assist them to upgrade their heating systems, lighting, insulation and fabric improvements, would have an improvement on their energy efficiency and their energy consumption, and allow for a reduced carbon footprint of businesses who take up that grant. hopefully that helps. I feel the question was perhaps looking for more detail than that in terms of how a decision was made that was a more appropriate use of the funding than maybe a different sort of funding to elicit a carbon reduction. And I'm afraid I wouldn't have that information here today, and I'm happy to ask officers to go away and consider that further.
Malcolm, as part of the application for the grant process, would there have to be a demonstration by the business about the quantifying the difference that it would make, and perhaps it's something that's maybe going to be able to be gathered retrospectively rather than upfront, and be able to learn from it?
Yes, convener. I mean, that would be absolutely right. I think the onus would be on businesses to come forward and illustrate, fabric deficiencies within their building, or an old boiler that's no longer operating at maximum capacity, and then how the investment would benefit. But I think you're right in what you say, that it's almost once the investment's gone in, then you can have the factual information about what the benefit's been. But as I sit here now, I'm confident that the investment will have a benefit on climate change within the Falkirk area. I can't say definitively how much at this point.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. James, are you maybe not happy but content with that just now?
Yes, is there any projection at all about any estimation or range of reduction, or is it just we're going to invest and that will result in a reduction?
Malcolm?
No, we don't have a projection at this point. I think it's worth noting how quickly these funding announcements have come out, and how quickly officers have had to move to identify proposals that allow us to transfer the money from central government out to local businesses and residents. And so there is a limit to how much advanced planning has gone into this, but I'm confident that as I said before, given the investment is in energy efficiency sort of products, that there will be a positive impact.
I'm certainly aware that there has been high demand from businesses to seek help to actually become more carbon aware and become more carbon neutral, and that's one of the barriers to be able to take it forward. But I think there's potential there for some retrospective work to be done about seeing that what difference the funding has made, notwithstanding the short lead-in time to be able to get the funding out. Anne.
I'm sure James will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the issue here is the same as the issue we're raising in terms of the poverty report and in other reports. It's about quantifying. If we are spending these amounts of money, we need to be able to be assured that the money that the Falkirk Council is putting into the community is actually having the effect that we are intending it to have. I recognise that in terms of the Levelling Up funds, things were moved at a tremendous pace, and officers had very little time to put that together. But having now put together the proposals, it's time to look at the ways in which we monitor the impact of the monies that we are investing in the community, so that we've got hard and fast evidence. I presume that the businesses to whom we're giving money don't just run away, say thank you and goodbye, but that they are expected to give some kind of report back on the ways in which they've used it and the impact that's been there. And I think we just need to look at the ways in which we can measure it. I don't have the answer. I'm sure none of the officers there at the moment have the answer, but I think they're all clever enough to go away and find out.
And that was why I'd asked a wee bit about the application process and making it clear that the funding has to be able to make a difference. I think it's going to be difficult for us to know the impact before we make the grants available. I think that it's going to have to be the grants that are available, and they have to demonstrate the impact that funding will make and the change that it will make to their carbon outputs. or the mitigations, and based on that, we will be able to get feedback. But I think it's not one that we could have the information beforehand. Otherwise, we might not get applications in time in order to be able to allocate the funding for that. So I don't know whether there's any more you can say about the application process, Malcolm.
I can't. I don't know if Kenny knew any more himself. I saw his hand going up, but apologies, Kenny, if I've thrown you a hot potato.
Thank you, Malcolm, and I've got my asbestos gloves on just to hold that potato as such. I was just going to come in and try and give a bit of reassurance to committee in regards to there is a criteria for anybody looking for this fund has to meet before we even would look at that, and try to come back to answer some of the questions very much for a high strategic level for local members. Is that we know that the areas that's highlighted in the report does have a positive impact on the climate change. One of the aspects we'll see when businesses is how much it does for their business when they return their findings to the forum. So it's very much, as you'd said, convener, is that once we get the feedback from them to know whether it's boilers, whether it is insulation, we don't know till the starting point the actual positive impact it does have, but we do know to meet the criteria it will have an overarching positive impact, and at the end of that will be an area that we'll be able to measure to try and conclude that very much to see what the impact of that money has through measuring it that way.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Okay, any other questions or comments? James?
It's just a quick follow-up question. Is there any examples from anywhere else in Scotland or the UK where similar grants have been handed out and businesses have reported back the carbon reductions?
Okay. Malcolm, or indeed any of the team aware of similar situations where the grants have been used to assist businesses? Michael?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In my previous role in West Dunbartonshire Council, we had a grant provided for assisting companies to address their carbon challenges, and it was very much an appraisal exercise to determine what intervention would address reducing their carbon footprint. So very much as Kenny has alluded to, there'd be an assessment to determine what the application would deliver in terms of carbon savings for that individual company, and an assessment carried out to make sure that whatever intervention was taking place and what grant was provided would deliver against that. So certainly from my experience, we have quite a robust process and system in place. I will share that with my colleagues to make sure that the grant is directed towards those that can have the biggest positive impact in reducing their carbon footprint.
Okay, James, are you a bit more content with that?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any other member, or are we happy to agree?
Option 2.
Yes, it was option 2 as well. I was proposing. Yeah. Great. Okay, thank you for that, colleagues. Moving on now to item 10, which is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and again, is it yourself, Malcolm, that's taking this one?
Thank you, convener. So this paper updates the executive members on the development of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund that's been awarded to Falkirk Council. The fund covers the period April 22 until March 25 and is intended to help build pride in place and increase life chances. Falkirk Council has been awarded just over £6 million, and that includes a £1 million payment to directly support the National Multiply programme for maths skills. Again, officers have had to work at real pace to respond to this award offer, and I would say the report outlines a mixture of how this funding will continue the good work that already existed around the employability sort of side of things, with money that used to come from the European Union, as well as identify some new approaches for investment in local communities. The proposal is advanced but not complete, and that's why the report is brought here today, to kind of give elected members a sight of the direction of travel that we're moving in, and allow for any sort of input, and then the final report or final proposals will be locked down in the coming weeks and shared with group leaders in late July, before the final submission is made to the UK government in early August. So there's detail in the report, particularly around about 5.7 in terms of some of the aspects that the money would look to go towards, and I have a number of officers here with me today to help answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. Councillor Garner.
Thanks, Convener, and thank you to Malcolm, Gillian and the team. I'd like to start by saying that I'm really pleased to see this investment coming forward to Falkirk area over the next 3 years. Some £6 million of shared prosperity funding is a successor to the former money received from the EU, and includes just over £1 million support to the National Multiply programme for improving maths skills, as Malcolm said. And this will be delivered by officers in partnership with Forth Valley College and other key stakeholders. I'd like to thank officers for working at pace, consulting with community groups and business representatives on the proposals. These will ultimately focus on 3 priorities: supporting our local businesses, investing in people and skills, and putting money into our communities and places. Money will go towards enabling the council to continue to deliver services through our employment and training services, and that is vital if we are going to assist people getting employment or support them to find better opportunities. There is no better way to counter the impact of cost of living crisis than to be in employment. In addition to this activity, there are a number of new emerging priorities that will also be funded, which will further improve the area and help local people. Happy to move in the recommendations, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. I'm happy to second the report. I'll just open it up for any questions or comments. James.
Happy with the report, and thank Malcolm and the team for the report. Convener, as Councillor Garner says, it's great to receive money for UK Prosperity Fund, the UK government. People were quite sceptical regarding us coming to Europe, where would that money come from, but as we've seen, UK government stepped up to the mark. And as I've said previously before, it doesn't matter where the money comes from, we'll take any money that any government sends us, and if it benefits the people in Falkirk area, we'll take it. Thank you very much, Convener.
Siobhan.
Thanks. Yeah, just comment, and I know we've covered it on every one of the reports. And I wouldn't say I'm satisfied with the answers, but I do understand them. What I would say, just moving forward, and I know there's still more work to be done on this, I don't find it unrealistic to expect a more in-depth overview of the potential. I'm not asking for facts and figures, but a more in-depth look at the potential implications when we're spending £6 million in our area. I just have found the reports lacking.
I think that has to be accepted and taken on board, Siobhan. Anne?
In the interests of monitoring the outcome, I noticed that it's 7.2. There are posts going to be created which will be administering this fund. I think it's important that we write into those job descriptions the monitoring and feedback of the impact that the use of the funds has had into those job descriptions, clearly that's a clear opportunity to do that. And I do see that there's further information about the environmental impact at 7.6 as well. So thank you at least for that.
Okay, thank you for that, Anne. Malcolm, do you want to say anything in relation to the additional posts?
If I could maybe ask Pete to come in on that one, as I think Pete will be in charge of leading the fund and monitoring on it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I mean, we have to remember that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is the replacement of what has traditionally been European funding to local authorities, ERDF and ESF. A core component of that we have had to do in our reporting and our compliance is ensuring that the money is having the impact on a level of outputs that are expected. So to give assurance, yes, that will be the case, and the staff, the compliance staff that will be looking to take on board, as well as the other officers, the business advisors officers as well, will be in a position to ensure that this is an area that is particularly concentrated on with regard to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and it will relate back to the LACER fund as well as we look to take that forward. So yes, these will be areas that will be picked up.
Okay, thank you, Pete. And just to add to that, I can say that over the years, Falkirk Council has delivered programmes through the European funding, the LEADER funding, and had to take on the compliance of those and provide feedback and reports. So this is not something that is new to us to do. So we were well versed in doing that in the past. So I've got a great deal of confidence that we'll be able to do that successfully going forward. I think I have Ewan, and then is it James you want to come in? Ewan first.
Thank you, convener. It's just an additional point on Councillor Patterson's statement earlier. It might be worthwhile, especially in distribution of these reports, if officers give us a direct link to potentially who authored a specific part of the report, or whether the authors would be receptive to further investigation around their conclusions in regards to sustainability and environmental impact. So I do note that there has been a positive suggestion in this report of the impact of this funding, and whilst that may seem necessarily intuitive, I do think there would be a desire for the purposes of scrutiny, as well as coming to those conclusions and making sure they're robust, for us to have sort of preemptive access to the working that was done to come to those conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's a fair point. I think it's been the timing of that's been the issue in this particular case. But as Malcolm said, that there's further work to be done on this, and there'll be an opportunity for members to actually have greater involvement going forward, and indeed shaping the projects, particularly within our communities. Because can't forget that this is meant to be pushed out into our communities, and it's something that we all want to see the benefits of across the piece. James?
Thank you, convener. I was just going to say that the plan looks good in terms of meeting the investment priorities of supporting local business, people, skills and investment, and communities in place, and I look forward to seeing in more detail how those will be fleshed out, but it's a good framework to start with.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions or comments, are we happy to agree the report? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 11, which is the UK Levelling Up Fund, Champney Junction proposals, and the 801 Alton Gorge update. And again, I think it's back with Malcolm.
Thank you, convener. In this instance, I would appreciate if I could bring in Paul Kettrick to take us through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, convener. The purpose of the report is to advise Council Executive on the second round of levelling up funding and the proposal for a joint submission with West Lothian for Junction 3M9, including the Champney Junction, which is within the Falkirk Council boundary, and to provide an update on the 801 Avon Gorge project, which, whilst initially considered as a potential second round levelling up fund bid, will now be a part of a strategic transport application as part of any future round of levelling up funding, or indeed any other fundings that may be available. The recommendations are set out in section 2 and seek approval for the joint submission for a levelling up fund bid for Junction 3M9 and the Champney Junction with West Lothian. And the recommendations also note the position on the A801 Avon Gorge project and the discussions with Transport Scotland, and seeks approval to progress the project development actions noted in the report with both Transport Scotland and West Lothian Council that will enable a future bid for levelling up funds to be made. The points worth noting within the report are sections 4 and 5, which summarise the background to the levelling up funds and the previous success Falkirk Council has had in securing £20 million for the Westfield Bridge project, and notes the closing date for the second round of levelling up fund bid of the 6th of July, which will require to be met, and officers are currently working with counterparts in West Lothian to make the bid, subject to approval of this report today. Section 6 outlines the background to the M9 Junction 3 and Champney project, which will in summary redistribute traffic for Bowness and Blackness, and by including the junction in the project with West Lothian, we can mitigate the impacts of a potential project that they would progress with if they were to do so in isolation. The funding currently allocated in the General Services Capital Programme for Champney, if the bid was successful, could also be redistributed. Section 6 also confirms that a bid for funding for Avon Gorge will not be made as part of the second round on the basis that the project will require substantially more than the £20 million external funding under the current round of levelling up fund, and to secure such funding there will be further significant technical appraisals and business case development required, and therefore the conclusion is that any application at this stage would be premature. Section 7 reiterates the importance of Avon Gorge and notes that previous cost estimates were undertaken in 2020 and that these will substantially have increased, and particularly when reflecting upon that the current design is 10 years old and the considerable inflationary pressures that are currently affecting construction industry in general. In terms of taking the project forward, Chair, the original project proposals were for 50% Council, 50% Transport Scotland funding, and at this stage none of the parties, if the costs have substantially increased, have the funding available, and therefore it's essential that we seek external sources of funding to support the project. Over recent months there has been an active engagement with Transport Scotland, and the parties are seeking to agree a memorandum of understanding that will establish the principles for project delivery. As part of these discussions, agreement has been reached that the Council and West Lothian will pursue a joint application for the next round of levelling up funding if it is confirmed, and continue to work collaboratively with Transport Scotland to progress Avon Gorge to a more mature state to allow it to be delivered. A report today to West Lothian Council's executive is also seeking similar approvals as we are here today. Section 9 outlines financial, resource, legal and policy implications, and in summary, Convener, there are no substantial negative risks associated with the application for the levelling up fund bid, and however, as with all construction and infrastructure projects, there is risks associated with inflation, contractual performance, specification changes that will require to be managed. On sustainability and the impact on the climate, which has been a hot topic this morning, it is in the early process for both of these projects to establish the full environmental impacts, but it's clear to say that as with all major infrastructure projects, there will be substantial embedded carbon in the materials and constructions of these, and this will be evaluated and reported upon as the projects progress, together with the impacts on road safety, resilience and journey time impacts. In conclusion, Convener, an application for Avon Gorge would be premature by the Council itself rather than in partnership, and would be unlikely to succeed with the inadequate information currently available. And the opportunity to make an application for a levelling up fund for the project at Champney Junction will benefit our communities and enable establishment of a collaborative delivery model with West Lothian, which will benefit us going forward when we come to deliver the more substantially larger and complex project of Avon Gorge. The progression of the proposed actions to develop Avon Gorge project will enable a more comprehensive information to be available and will therefore increase the potential success of any funding bid. I'm happy to take any questions, Convener.
Thank you, Paul, and that was a very comprehensive overview, and I thank you for that. I'll go to Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, it was very comprehensive, Paul. And thanks to Malcolm and Paul for the updates and the report. This proposal provides the opportunity for Falkirk Council to seek additional funding through the Levelling Up Fund for Champney as part of West Lothian's application for the Junction 3 M9. This infrastructure will greatly improve the access to the motorway network for Bowness, Blackness and alleviate pressure in Junction 5 Grangemouth. If approved, the funding will provide resources to deliver the Champney Junction and also allow current capital plan funding to be reallocated away from this project to other priorities. Some elected members and members of the public may have concerns about what this means for the progress of Avon project. The good news is that this report recognises how important the project is both locally and nationally, with Transport Scotland now due to issue a draft memorandum of understanding for ourselves and West Lothian Council to consider. As Paul said, West Lothian Council is considering a report today that instructs their officers to continue to work with our officers to develop a future bid for improvements to the A01, including the provision of a new Avon Gorge Bridge. This is progress that has never been previously achieved. The proposed approach is actually a step forward that brings Avon Gorge closer to becoming a reality. The only alternative we have to this recommendation would be to apply for the Avon Gorge now. Officers, in my opinion, are clear that such an application for the up to £50 million of LUF funding on our own would be premature and unlikely to be successful. This is mainly because we would have no partners. In the coming months, officers will review the technical requirements and climate change obligations linked to the project, and the business case will be prepared ahead of the funding submission that stands a much better chance of success. To reinforce this point, a meeting of senior officers and political leaders from West Lothian and Falkirk Council has currently been arranged to add further momentum in progressing the project, and a further report in progress for Avon Gorge and the Memorandum of Understanding will be brought by officers before the Executive. Happy to agree the recommendations, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Councillor Devine.
I'd like to second the report and reserve the right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Hannah, I think you have an amendment.
I do. I actually have two amendments to the report. Again, in advance of the meeting, both to officers and to leaders of the other groups. I do apologise, Billy. I should have circulated it to you as well. My apologies on that. I'll get it right next time. We accept that the circumstances are such that the decision having been made by the officers and the recommendations the officers are putting forward to us here today are for the moment. But we have to express disappointment that the Avon Gorge plan has been put on the back burner. Thank you, Siobhan. I mean, this Avon Gorge upgrade plan has, as far as I can gather, been on the cards for the last 20 years. And it does seem strange to me that it's kind of at the last minute we're changing from one plan to another plan when we know that this has been an issue for such a very, very long time. And I think the people of the Falkirk area will be disappointed in this too. The Avon Gorge proposal is not just something that is going to help people get from A to B. The Avon Gorge proposal is something that's going to save lives. It's going to save money for a great many businesses because it's going to make a link between the M9 and the M8. It has a huge number of benefits both for the local economy in Falkirk and for the local economy in West Lothian and for the whole of central Scotland indeed. So my concern here is not to oppose the recommendations in the report, but to emphasise the importance of continuing the work that's being done and giving greater priority. As I say, the Avon Gorge proposal has been a priority for this council Scottish Government and West Lothian for 20 years. I'd hate to see what would happen if it wasn't a priority. So what we would like is, I have proposed an amendment to ask for a further report setting out an action plan and timescales for progressing the Avon Gorge upgrade development, including active engagement with West Lothian Council, Transport Scotland, and I think we also have to engage with interested businesses. There are a number of supermarkets, a number of businesses in the Grangemouth area and so on who have an interest in this, and I think we need to be consulting with them as well. My first amendment was to add at point 4 after project, those words that I've given you. I initially had said to ask for a report to the next meeting. I'm happy to, I've had some discussion with Cecil, and I'm happy to change that to be a report to the September meeting rather than the August meeting. She was pointing out to me, which is fair comment, that it might be putting too big a burden on the officers to bring a report in that time scale. So I'm happy to change that, particularly given various things we've said today are putting a lot of pressures onto officers for reports and activities. So that first is the first amendment. The second amendment is to add a new point 6. Again, it's following on from the discussions we've had about the climate change, that what we would like to do is request a report setting out the climate change implications of the Champney Junction and the Junction 3 proposals, and agree that full information on the equalities and climate change implications for the Avon Gorge project are made available at the next stage when members are asked to take a decision on progressing it. There are clearly numerous positive and negative climate change impacts of works of this scale, and it's important that we have these spelled out, so we would ask that that comes at the next stage. So those are the two amendments I would like to move, with the acceptance of Cecil's amendment to my amendment to make it September rather than the August meeting.
Thank you for that, Anne. Have you got a formal seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you, Ewan. I personally don't have an issue with either of the proposals there. I know that officers have been working on pulling together a meeting of all those interested parties in relation to Avon Gorge, recognising that it is a priority for Falkirk Council, and we've had our challenges over the years, and I actually think that it's been a priority for a bit more than 20 years. And I'm sure others will be able to talk a wee bit more around that. But just the challenge of bringing a report to the August meeting would mean the report would have to be written by mid-July, and I think that we need to give officers a little bit more time to do that work. But certainly the next available meeting would be September, which would make more sense. I think Paul has already given a commitment to bring back details around the environmental impacts of the project, and it would make sense to actually look at the environmental impacts of the Avon Gorge and look at the balance there, because I know that investments in roads infrastructure can be challenging, but that there is a balance around other aspects of climate impacts there. So I'm personally content with that, but I'll go to the mover and the seconder of the motion.
Yeah, I'm pretty content with something.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I will therefore open it up for any other questions or comments. James?
Thanks, convener. It's on page 104, 4.3 regarding the round 1 application that we were successful for 20 million. It concerns me that we've got a time scale to achieve this, and at the moment the project's currently subject to review to ensure affordability given current construction inflationary pressures. And I know that it's saying that there's got to be an updated report to the executive in the future. if we didn't achieve that, that's £20 million we lose. What assurances have we got that we can achieve this in the timescales given?
Okay, Paul, are you able to give a wee bit more of a clarity around that?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I can provide clarity. The conclusion in the review that we're currently undertaking will be completed over the summer and will be reported. We're intending to report back to Council Executive in October. And at that point, we would be in a position, subject to approval of us meeting the £20 million funding, that we would then proceed to the procurement stage. Colleagues are confident in terms of the delivery side that all being well, and we do meet the 20 million cap on the project, that we can deliver it in time for the close of the project funding round.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, are we content to agree the amended report? James, you're kind of late. Okay.
It was just a very quick question on the meeting of the £20 million in regard to the Westfield Bridge. If that's not met, will we lose the investment, or is there any alternative? As in, of changing the plan?
I think it was a specific bid, but I'll go to Paul.
Thank you, Convener. It was a specific bid, and hence why we're undertaking the review, which will also include any necessary value engineering required to bring the project, if it is to proceed within that 20 million cap. If that is not possible, then clearly there would be a decision for Council to make on how it wishes to proceed at that stage.
Okay. And that may come as a call to whether or not we would look to fund the gap. That may well be what we'll be asked to do if that is indeed the case, but I sincerely hope not. Not that I would want to influence the report in any way, Paul. Okay, and in which case I'll close the meeting. I thank everybody for their attendance this morning, and some of you we will see again this afternoon at the Education, Children and Young People's Executive, which starts at 2 o'clock. In the meantime, you are free to go and get some lunch, and thank you very much for your attendance today.